Samuel Ramani, Associate Fellow at the RUSI think tank and CEO of the consultancy Pangea Geopolitical Risk. Sam, welcome back to the programme. Good to see you again. How significant is this for Syria?
Well, I think it's a real milestone for Syria because even if these elections are not fully democratic, because you don't have the voting in the Druze areas like Suwaida or some of the Kurdish-controlled areas like Hasaka or other places where there's security problems like Raqqa, they're still the most democratic elections that Syria has ever had in living memory for anyone. I mean, the 250 seats in the old parliament when the Ba'athist regime was there used to be reserved entirely for Assad loyalists. And now al-Shura is only responsible for appointing 1/3. And so it's not really fully democratic, but it's the most democratic election Syria has ever had. And they've managed to be achieved with limited, so far, communal violence or strife, which is another big success.
What are your expectations for the outcome of this election when we get the results?
Well, I think that al-Shura is obviously going to be able to use this parliament to maintain broader power. And the government and the parliament is probably going to be in lockstep with HTS's now disbanded, but HTS's goals. And I think that there also will be some efforts at inclusivity, and there'll be some efforts as, to maybe to appoint some women or some minorities into some positions to encourage reconstruction investments. But I think there's still a long way to go on that front and on that point of view. So, but I do think that this outcome is going to lead to potentially more investments in the country. What we've seen from Saudi Arabia, for example, is debt forgiveness, but not necessarily large capital infusions. Now it's time for capital infusions from the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris, and maybe even the Americans and the Europeans who have now lifted the sanctions on Syria for the most part.
Do you think the election results will be accepted? I mean, can the new parliament bring stability, or are there still challenges ahead?
I mean, obviously it depends on how much power the parliament is basically given. If it's under the Assad-era system, basically it was just a rubber stamp, and it was just kind of a way of reaffirming the power of the old government. But under this new government, it may be possible that they actually are involved in directly overseeing reconstruction projects in some of the war-torn areas. They may be involved in coordinating energy supply deals, maybe ameliorating or assuaging some of the budgetary problems that we've seen in Syria, and creating a more stable financial system and architecture. So if they can pass legislation, that they're involved in regulatory reforms, they're involved in reconstruction, then this parliament actually has the ability to exert some power, and that will lead to more confidence in the Syrian system and more investment. But alternatively, if al-Shura just kind of stuffs the parliament with loyalists and allies and gives it limited constitutional powers, then it could look like another dictatorship, and the investment in the stability of Syria could be imperiled. So it really depends on how much power this parliament has and how much al-Shura actually entrusts it with.
Syria's been slowly restoring diplomatic ties with its neighbours and returning to the international community in some shape or form. How might this diplomatic thaw influence what's going on inside the country in its domestic political process?
Well, I think that obviously Syria now has got a much wider array of partners to be able to work with and consider, whereas the previous government of Bashar al-Assad was primarily dependent on Russia and Iran. Syria's got the whole world open to them. I mean, even the Russians, they have decent relationships with Putin and al-Shura and establishing talk. I mean, there are obviously some issues on the international stage that al-Shura wants to kind of iron out. One of them is obviously Israel and their tendency to back the Druze as well as carry out unilateral military strikes. The other is Turkey and the whole situation with the Kurds. But I think that al-Shura will be confident that if he can get a stable parliament and international recognition that these elections were held somewhat successfully, that he will have more bargaining power in the normalization talks with Israel that will inevitably transpire, and also future talks with Turkey on managing and mitigating the Kurdish issue in a way that's more acceptable to broader international investors. So he has to kind of thread a lot of needles. But I think that these elections could be good for Syria's international standing and allow Syria to actually negotiate itself in a position which is on its own terms. And moreover, there's lots of Syrians who are nostalgic for it being a power in the Arab world, like it was when Hafez al-Assad was in power or during the 1950s and 1960s. And this gives Syria a chance to assert itself not just as a war-torn country that's recovering, but also as a future power that shapes the Arab and regional international order.
Samuel, good to see you. Samuel Ramani, Associate Fellow at the RUSI think tank.